South Africa is on a slow growth and high inflation cycle, and for that to change, the country has to demonstrate that it is serious about implementing agreed policies that will improve inclusive economic growth. But according to the latest Policy Uncertainty Index by the Northwest University's Business School, uncertainty amongst investors, local and abroad, is at a record high in the second quarter of 2022. I caught up with Professor Raymond Parsons at the Business School, and I first asked him how they measure policy uncertainty, but he was adamant that Eskom remains South Africa's biggest challenge.
Well, in a nutshell, we felt a few years ago that almost every analysis of the South African economy spoke about policy uncertainty, that investors, business people, even consumers were not clear what the economic direction of the country was. There were too many uncertainties in the policy direction, too many shocks, unexpected shocks, which were announced. So we thought, let's look at the international experience where there were uncertainty models being prepared over several years, because uncertainty is a global phenomenon, not just a South African phenomenon. So we drew on the econometric models and we came up with our index 5 or 6 years ago, which is published quarterly, that the baseline is 50. If it's above 50, it means that uncertainty is either rising or it's in fact negative territory. And if it's below 50, then it's in positive territory. So the good news is if it's below 50, bad news if it's above, and at the moment it's reached a record high level of 60.7, which is quite high for the last few years. So that's the message that the present index is conveying to all of us.
This index is for the second quarter for 2022. It's at 60.9%, rising from 59.7% in quarter one. What are the events that have caused the rise in the second quarter's uncertainty index?
Well, the sharp rise in the second quarter of this year really flows from both global factors and domestic factors. And it's like the blades of a scissors. One doesn't always know which one is doing the cutting, but it's both, obviously. And we've got the Russian-Ukraine war, the economic fallout from there, slowdown in the world economy, global inflation, disruption of the supply chains. So that's impacted on South Africa. On the other hand, there are domestic factors which, although not entirely negative, there are some positive factors, but in the second quarter, it was the negative factors, such as the floods in, of course, KwaZulu-Natal, where we need an answer as to how quickly they will be repaired and fixed so that we can resume, our economic activity regionally there on a full basis. And then also, very importantly, the issue of the Eskom showed letting, which is really quite serious. It puts a big question mark over us when there is this drastic load shedding, not only because it's a daily disruption to all of us, but equally importantly, what message is it sending to the investors, to the credit rating agencies, that we're not getting this right? I think that's the most important point we need to address, is we've got to send out a message that we are going to get on top of the Eskom problem and we are going to turn it around, rather than constantly having these negative shocks which merely generate more uncertainty as to whether our supply of electricity is indeed secure.
Some would say that's a very, very difficult thing to do, Professor Parsons, looking at the spanners that have been thrown in the works in the past 2 years with COVID-19, followed by the Ukraine-Russia war, now high inflation leading to the U.S. Federal Reserve raising interest rates by 75 basis points. We are also looking at domestically when it comes to our interest rates later this month from the Reserve Bank. Some would say all these factors
are actually influencing how we do things, and they are making things even more difficult to assure or reassure the world about our policies?
Well, that is the challenge. And now you either run away from it or you find solutions to it. And if we haven't found them yet, then we've got to look again, go back to how we implement things and how we can expedite it. I like to say, of course, that two things. The first is that while we may well be worried about what is happening globally, I think Eskom is a bigger threat to our economic performance now than the Federal Reserve and its interest rates. That's on our doorstep, Eskom. I come back to my point. Let's focus on the issues over which we have control and where we can still make a difference. And then, of course, it is true, and one must understand it's a reality that has to be managed, that I like to say that when we talk about the GDP, the gross domestic product, it's not only the gross domestic product, it's also the gross domestic politics. And we'll agree that often it's very gross in South Africa, but nonetheless, those are two sides of the same coin. We are going into a volatile period for the governing party. I think it may not be too much to ask that wherever it's possible, bear in mind that what is said and done in a party political sense can have economic implications. So I think it's very important that we see the next 6 months, whether it's globally or from an economic point of view or from a political point of view, let's try, to the extent that it's possible, to look past our own immediate interests and say, what is at stake now for the national interest, for the South Africa that we all would like to see, with a bigger, stronger and better economy serving the people better than it's doing now. We have the means to do it. We've got to just mobilize it more effectively, implement and collaborate in order to understand the urgency of what we're facing, and above all, for all the things we want to do to keep the lights on.